Hey friends, it's Gloria and welcome back to another video. I'm going to be doing my June wrap up, talking about all the books that I read in the month of June. I'm going to kick off with some of the first books that I read in the month, and I am now obsessed. I'm committed to finishing the series this year, maybe even by the end of the summer, which is saying a lot because it's an 18-book series. I am talking about Maisie Dobbs by Jacqueline Winspear. I've had this book on my shelves for ages. I've seen so many people talk and rave about it across all areas of booktube, like people who read historical, people who just read mysteries, people who read classics. Like, this book and this author just did a fantastic job. This is definitely a new favorite for me. I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. This follows Maisie Dobbs, who is a young woman in her 30s following World War I. She is a private investigator and psychologist, which is very rare to be a woman in that field, and she is solving cases. The continuation of the series is really her solving different mysteries, but this focuses on her life, her upbringing, how she became a private investigator. The little bit of romance sprinkled in here was amazing, and really more than anything, this series so far has been what World War I was like and how it affected certain people from all walks of life, from the very poor to the very rich and everything in between. I've read 5 books in the series so far, all have to do with different people affected by the war in various ways, so that is super interesting. I've not really read much about World War I, so I feel like this was just very refreshing to read and very interesting and so well done. I think Jacqueline Winspear did an amazing job of creating a sense of place. Like, I felt World War I England so well in this character, and even though this was a shorter read, I feel like I know Maisie Dobbs so well. So all that to say, I'm so invested. I absolutely love this book. I will say the rest of the books have all been around 3.5 stars for me. The reason why I don't care quite as much is because I don't fully care about the mystery as much. Like, I'm not truly a mystery girl. I care about the character, and you get to know more about Maisie and the different side characters through these mysteries, but I am still so invested and I want to continue reading the series. And what I also really like is that this book series is completed. The 18th book, The Comfort of Ghost, just released in June, so it is going to be start and finish, which I love. I don't like ongoing series. I don't like waiting for books to come out. I just want to start, read, finish it, close the book and be done, and just have that series under my belt and just know that I finished it. So that's just my personality though. The next book that I'll talk about, I also read for the historical fiction readathon that Shelley was hosting, and this one was on my TBR. I'm glad I finally read it, and that is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. So many people love this book, and I was kind of teetering back and forth between a 3 and a 4. I liked it, and it had some very interesting elements that I really appreciated, but at the end of the day, I had a hard time with the character and some decisions she was making, and the way that she was like thinking and feeling about things gave me a little bit of an icky vibe at certain times. The premise of this book is that a 26-year-old black woman in the 1970s goes back in time unknowingly, like she doesn't know what happens, kind of this random portal tug pull back in time to 19th century Maryland when slavery is still legal, and she is brought to a plantation where one of her white ancestors is residing, and he's growing up. She keeps getting brought back in time to certain moments of his life, and ultimately she gets a feel of what it was like to be a slave then and how she was treated. She has a white husband who is in on what's going on, but at the end of the day, I had a hard time with some decisions the character made, especially continually trusting a white man that was abusing her and raping women, and the way the character thought about it bothered me. Like, I felt like she didn't care enough, or it was very like nonchalant that it just happened, these atrocities. I don't know, it was some weird stuff in here that didn't fully sit well with me in certain parts, but this was a really interesting time travel novel. I'm glad I finally read it. Next, for the historical fiction readathon, I picked up and DNF'd, abandoned, did not finish Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I kind of knew it going in, but I'm happy with my decision, and I make no apologies, although I do make one apology. I'm sorry, Shelley, because this is one of your favorite books, and I didn't jive with it. I got 2 hours into the audiobook. I, first of all, hated the narration of the audiobook. I thought it was terrible. The narrator was doing really strange voices for all these different men, and I think that's part of it why I was kind of confused and like, what's going on. I feel like I was thrown into a time period, Tudor England, and I have absolutely no idea who anyone is, and the author's not really doing a good job of letting the reader know who anyone is. You're just sort of thrown into it, and there's time jumps and perspective changes, and I was like, what the heck is going on? Who are these people? What are they talking about? And the things that I did pick up on, I didn't like. I didn't care for Thomas Cromwell. I didn't care for the dialogue and conversations between this cardinal, and like it just all gave me such icky, gross feelings. It's like, I don't want to read about these nasty, stupid men in Tudor England. I don't know. I just didn't get good vibes, and I don't want to continue on. I don't think it's a Gloria book, and it's also so long. And the fact that I got 2 hours into it and it was such a slog, like I barely got to 2 hours, and I was like, no, I'm not gonna just push through. Like I want to be gripped and swept away and interested and immediately captivated by characters. None of that happened. So as much as I would have loved to read this, as much as I would have loved to found a new book set in Tudor England so I can learn something new, it wasn't for me. So I will be passing this book along, and also I will be getting rid of a couple more books on my shelves, Bring Up the Bodies and The Mirror and the Light, because this is a trilogy. So I'm saying goodbye to the whole trilogy, and that kind of feels good, if I'm honest. Get those books off my shelves. I'm sure that they will find themselves in the home of someone else that absolutely loves them and will cherish them and enjoy them, unlike me. All right, Finn is awake from his nap, so I'm gonna go deal with that, and then I will continue on with the rest of the books. So I'll be back in a flash. Sometime later, but moving right along, let's talk about some books that are set in a contemporary time period, starting with The Shell Seekers by Rosamund Pilcher. So this book was published in the 1980s, and I think it's set during the 1980s, unless it's set years prior. I'm not entirely sure. I feel like the date doesn't actually matter as much as this book as a whole, the storytelling. So this is probably this author's most famous work, I would say, based on what I've heard. I read Winter Solstice by her in January, Snow in April, and now this book in June, and I'm kind of determined to read Coming Home in September, maybe this year. Like I mentioned in the mid-year freakout, I think she's a new favorite author, even though this wasn't an all-time favorite book. I ended up landing on 3 stars, only because the side characters and the like meanderingness of this was too much at times. It's a very chunky monkey book, and I loved the main character and her backstory and getting the glimpse into everything and how the story all unfolded. I liked all of that. It was wonderful, and I was so there for it. I was set in it and I cared about her, but her children are atrocious, and sometimes I just felt like they were unnecessarily there. Like I wanted more of her and less of her stupid kids. But basically the story follows an older woman, and it looks back at her entire life, jumping into her kids' lives as well, and how they are all impacted ultimately of the main story that she had of a love during the war. All of her times growing up with her dad, who was an artist, and he created this famous painting called The Shell Seekers, and all of her children are just terrible and they just want money. And then some of her other kids are just making dumb life choices. And I think classic to this author, she does have that multiple generation family combination, messy family storytelling, if all of that makes sense. And I'm interested. I was there for it, and it's slow, cozy, even though it deals with very heavy topics and very sad themes. But I think she's a beautiful writer. So she's a new favorite author for sure, even though this isn't a new favorite standout book for me. I don't see myself rereading this because I hated some of those characters, but I like the main character. So that was that. But I understand the hype and the love for this author. So I'm happy to report I'm still really enjoying her books and hope to read more of them. Then I finished this, it's like a very heavy brick of a book, The Hour I First Believed by Wally Lamb. I picked this up because I thought that I was completing the July Buzzwordathon prompt is to read a word with like measurement in the title, and I thought hour, like you measure time by hours. But then I started reading this in June, thinking it was July, and so I ended up just finishing it. This was a very long 25-hour audiobook, and it felt long and drawn out and meandering as well. I ended up landing on 2.5 stars with this one. I think that this is a book for fans of, hear me out, Stephen King, even though I only read one of his books, but it gave me the 11/22/63 vibes, not the time travel, but the main character energy and like the minutia detail of everything. This book follows a 40-something-year-old male teacher, and him and his wife are teachers at Columbine High School when the school shooting breaks out. So that is like the pinnacle moment of the story, although that happens at the 35% mark of the book. Like 7 hours into the book, we only get Columbine. Everything else is backstory. And then after the fact, it's primarily his wife's PTSD dealing with the Columbine school shooting, because she was there, he wasn't. And then the randomness of his backstory and his life. We get tons of journal entries and letters of his ancestors hundreds of years ago, all of these women that amounted to some moment of history that influenced his life. There were just too many details. 11/22/63 worked for me because of the plot, and there was just like a reason to care about all the details. Ultimately for this one, I did not care about all of the details. It's hard because he's a good writer, but it was just too much. And then at the end of the day, I have to care about my main character. And if he was the character that I could root for, then that would have been great. But he sucked. He was like icky, gross, male sexual innuendos about everything. Ugh. I was interrupted. But I was saying that I did not like this main character very much in the long run. He just made poor choices. He was human, but he gave me the ick vibes a lot. There's a lot of description of sexual content in this book. I don't know if I totally understand what the male gaze is, but I feel like it's in this book. Like, it's written from a male perspective, and anytime any woman is depicted, the way that she looks is described, and the way that this man thinks about women. There's also adultery in here. It's just a lot of sexual content that I don't want to read about. This book is just really depressing through and through. There were a lot of parts that I was like, why is this in here? Like, this could have been edited out. This is not pivotal to the story. And I think the point is there is no really story or plot. It's really just character development. I think this book could really work for a lot of people. If you don't mind pretty much every single trigger warning out there, like everything is in here, but not to like a crazy amount or over the top. It's just everything is in here to some degree, and it's really a character driven novel more than anything. I don't know, I didn't love it. I also didn't hate it because I pushed through it. 25 hours I pushed through it. I couldn't push through Wolf Hall, but I pushed through this. I guess that says something, even though I didn't love it. But yeah, it's a commitment, and I think this could really be for some people. It just wasn't my kind of book. And then I picked up a thriller, Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. This actually worked for the June Buzzwordathon prompt of 2 of the same word in the title. This is a very hyped thriller, and I have kind of not been reading any thrillers pretty much for the past few years. I started reading a lot of thrillers when I got back into reading, but then most I was like, I don't really want to read about that content. This one I actually really enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars. I think it was a very interesting premise. This is about a woman who witnesses her son killing someone, and then she goes back in time every day. So she wakes up like the day before, and then she wakes up 2 days before and 3 days before, and on those days she's trying to find out information about why her son could have killed someone, because that seems so out of the blue. What I really liked is that details were very much described in terms of how am I traveling back in time, like what is going on. She tries to figure that out. She tries to talk to people to explain that to her as best as she can. She's searching out details that I feel like are relevant to overthinker. When someone who's reading this book from a realistic perspective, as much as you can be from a time travel novel, the things that I'm asking as a reader are being answered in this book, and I really like that. And I thought this was an interesting book. It's set in the UK. It has to do with like mobs and gangs and bad guys. The police are involved, and it's also ultimately a book about marriage as well, which was an interesting perspective that I liked to have. So this was thoroughly enjoyable. I mean, there is a lot of language in this book and some sexual content, so you know, avoid it if that's not what you want to read about, but as far as thrillers go, it was pretty good. Then I picked up the Rom-Commers by Catherine Center, and I hated it. This is now the 2nd book in a row by her. Last year, Hello Stranger, and this year, the Rom-Commers, that I actively like despised in terms of romance books that I've read. I could not stand this couple. I hated the main guy. He was terrible. He treated her horribly, and I don't understand anyone who would give this book a good rating, how they can excuse that. It's about 2 screenwriters, about a girl that's like down on her luck, and she has to take care of her dad, and she hasn't followed her dreams, and she's kind of this like quirky little girl, not like other girls. She goes to Hollywood and she moves in with a screenwriter guy, and they have to write a book together in the span of a week, and of course they fall in love. He treats her like crap this whole time. He's just a horrible man. I don't understand it. Their romance sucked, and all of the things sucked. Like, everything about this book was just not for me. So there's that. I didn't love it, and now I'm conflicted because I really loved The Bodyguard by her when that came out a few years back, like 3 years back, but the last 2 books of hers have just been trash to me. I know she has a very extensive backlist. I'm curious about those, but I don't know if I'm gonna continue trying her new books. Moving on and ending with nonfiction, I picked up French Kids Eat Everything: How Our Family Moved to France, Cured Picky Eating, Banned Snacking, and Discovered 10 Simple Rules for Raising Happy, Healthy Eaters. This I picked up on a total whim, but it's very much on the lines of if you read the other French book, Bringing Up Bebe, you'd probably really enjoy this one. I read some reviews that I thought were really funny on Goodreads about how, like, this person was saying, oh, I'm so sick of like French people thinking they're better than everyone else. But actually, when described in this book, they are doing it better than everyone else. This book made me think a lot about how I want to raise Finn and think about eating, but also it feels very daunting and impossible. Like, the French way and culture of just eating and food and the way that they raise their kids around food is so completely night and day different than how we are in America and how we feed our kids and what we feed them and the methods and the times. It's it's just completely different, and I feel like it would be nearly impossible to do the things that she did in this book unless you were living in France, and everyone around you is doing that as well, and society around you is doing that and expects that of you and your kids. But here it would be impossible. Like the number one thing is you do not snack. Like under any circumstances do you give your kids snacks ever, because that will ruin their appetite and then they won't eat their dinner. And if they're not hungry, of course they're gonna be picky. And I'm just like, how do you not snack? Like that, our culture in the US is just, and how I was raised, like everyone snacks. You do not give your kids snacks. That would be preposterous. Like how did you stop that from happening? I don't know. So that's just one little simple thing, but there's like a million other ways. But I thought this was really interesting. It's part memoir, the story of how her family moved to France and that year of their lives together and how she learned to do this, and then the things that she noticed about French culture along the way, particularly when it comes to eating. I thought this book was very fascinating. I gave it 4 stars. I mean, it made me think a lot. It made me think about ways that I want to parent and what I want to try to do. I don't love everything about what the French do at all. I'm not saying that, but this just made me think about how I want to do things. So I thoroughly enjoyed and would recommend if you're at all interested in like changing your picky eater behaviors, but it also feels impossible at the same time. If you're interested, I will read. Rule number 1, parents, you are in charge of food education. 2, avoid emotional eating. 3, parents schedule meals and menus. Kids eat what adults eat, no short order cooking. 4, eat family meals together, no distractions. 5, eat your veggies, think variety. 6, you don't have to like it, but you do have to taste it. 7, no snacking. It's okay to feel hungry between meals. 8, slow food is happy food, as in eat slow. 9, eat mostly real food. Special occasions are okay to have treats and takeout, but eat real food. And 10, remember eating is joyful, so relax. So those are just some of the things that she covers in this book. And finally, I picked up the graphic novel, How War Begins, Dispatches from the Ukrainian Invasion by Igor. He wrote a book a while back that I read, was also a graphic novel, called The Ukrainian and Russian Notebooks, and it described the Ukrainian famine in the 1930s. And this follows the current Ukrainian-Russian war, but also how it began in 2014. This author and illustrator is Italian, so he originally writes in Italian and then this is translated into English. And I think there is some lost in translation stuff because this feels very choppy and disjointed. It's kind of like a journal entry, diary entries. You're following random stories and accounts of people going through this war. It was still very interesting to read, but it's hard to read at the same time. It just doesn't have that like flow of natural storytelling. It just feels like you're reading random inserts of people and the things that they experienced during this war that they're currently experiencing. So even though this book was a bit disjointed and a bit choppy, I would still recommend it for those that are particularly interested in learning more about this Ukraine-Russian war in a different format, in a maybe more easy to digest format than reading a newspaper article or something like that. But it's still along those same lines. Just you're getting information about what's going on and you're hearing it from real people that are on the ground living through it today, and kind of the horror stories of what's going on behind the scenes that maybe not a lot of people know. That wraps up my June reading. I would say overall positive, even though, you know, my feelings about some of these books might have been unpopular, but I'm glad I'm still on the Rosamund Pilcher train, and I'm glad that I read Maisie Dobbs and loved it and found a new kind of fave series to dive into. I'm excited to read through them this summer, even though I'll say most of the books feel more wintry. They feel more of like a Christmas or fall read, but I'm just reading through them now, so that's what's gonna happen. Some new fun finds and some maybe not so great books, but let me know what you think. If you have any thoughts on my reading, and how was your June reading? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching today, spending some time with me, and I will see you guys in another video soon. Bye.